Hello, this is Trinity, and you're listening to Lovespiracy. I'm hoping this is the final part. Now we're going to get into Chernobyl. So, Chernobyl is in Ukraine, and I don't know if anybody knew it or if anybody noticed it, but the first place when he did this invasion was he took over Chernobyl. He literally took over Chernobyl. Okay, so I'm going to play this audio. And this came out, give me one second, February 2022. Now, this was 2 days after the invasion started. And this is called Why Would Russia Want to Take Chernobyl? The Kremlin may not consider the nuclear power plant itself a military asset, but the site of the 1986 disaster is strategically located between Belarus and Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. I'm going to play it now.
Has taken control of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in northern Ukraine. That plant was the site of an explosion in 1986 that led to the worst nuclear disaster in human history. The power plant is shut down now, but there are nuclear waste storage facilities on that site. Let's bring in NBC News senior reporter Alex Seitzwald now. Alex, when we hear Chernobyl, it immediately stirs up concern for a lot of people. Troops deliberately went after that site yesterday. Why is a radioactive wasteland so important to the Russian military?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that a lot of people were wondering because, as you said, this plant was shut down in 2000. It's not an operating power plant. It's basically a radioactive waste cleanup site at this point. But according to former and current U.S. officials that I spoke to, what's really going on here is probably just that the Chernobyl plant happens to be in a strategically located location. So it doesn't really have to do with the plant itself, it's just where it is. It's about 8 miles from the Belarusian border, and that's, of course, the Russian ally where they've been amassing troops in preparation for an invasion. And if the Russians come south through Belarus, they basically run right into Chernobyl as soon as they cross the border, and then it's about an 80-mile straight shot south to Kyiv. And there'd be no river crossings, no major geographical terrain in the area. So military planners that I've spoken to said basically this allowed the Russians to cross a major river in safe territory in Belarus and then come into to come into Ukraine as they work to encircle the capital.
So it seems that those troops, the Russians, are holding the plant now. And as it fell yesterday, there was speculation, concerns about what would happen if a radioactive cloud started drifting over Europe. Are environmental experts concerned about nuclear material from that site? What's the real worry here?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of concern. The radiation has decreased in the 35 or so years since that 1986 disaster, but this is still a very toxic site. And there's kind of two parts to keep in mind here. There's the actual damaged reactor, which was contained with what they call a sarcophagus, a lot of concrete, basically, and then they came back later and put a large dome over it. That is the most radioactive, the most hazardous site. So that was the...
Okay, I had to cut that off so that I can point something out that I'll be discussing after this. Pay attention to the concrete sarcophagus and the dome that was put on top of it. If you listen to my other videos, I pointed out that right before Ukraine became sovereign, they had they had the third largest nuclear stockpile, and they gave it up. They actually gave it to Russia. They gave it to Russia, so Russia has it. The only nuclear asset that Ukraine has is Chernobyl. The most dangerous nuclear piece of equipment they have is Chernobyl. I'm going to play the rest of the video, and then I'm going to tell you what happened when the troops went to, when they went and they took over. Like, that's the dumbest shit ever. But that's exactly what they did. Anyway, I'm going to finish the video.
place that the most concern is focused on right now. If there's any kind of fighting, if there was an errant explosion, it could release that contamination and send clouds up. But even beyond that, you have this large exclusion zone that they call it, where the soil, the trees, the animals, the abandoned houses, basically anything that was in this zone had radioactive dust and debris fall on it. And workers have for years been painstakingly removing soil, removing everything they can. So you could imagine if you have heavy fighting, if you have tanks rolling through and kicking up dirt, if you have explosions kicking up dirt, that it could lead to radioactive, fallout.
Okay. So, like I said, this came out the 2 days after the Russian invasion. Okay. And this is why I said that was super important. So I'm going to read you an article that came out 3 months later, in May of 2022. And they're discussing what... I'm just going to read it and you'll get it. So this is Vladimir Putin's troops have left Chernobyl after an erratic, illogical occupation of the nuclear disaster site. So I got to fix that. Hold on. Okay. So a lady named Julia, I can't pronounce her last name, so let's just call her Julia, still can't fathom why Russian soldiers set up camp in one of the most contaminated places on Earth. Perhaps their commanders didn't understand the risks, or worse, they knew the dangers but simply didn't care. She says it was a completely stupid order. As a tour guide, Julia used to bring tourists into Chernobyl exclusion zones, showing them around the site of the 1986 disaster that became one of the world's worst nuclear incidents. Now she returns to show the ABC the mess Russian soldiers left when they occupied the area after invading Ukraine on February 24th. I'm sorry, I thought it was on the 22nd. Okay. As we trek through the area, her first warning is about landmines, which are still being found. She says, don't walk on the grass. Moments later, a huge boom in the distance interrupts the otherwise eerie silence. Message received. Her next warning is about radiation. We're told to cover our bodies with clothing, not to eat or drink anything, and whatever you do, don't put any objects on the ground. That warning makes the actions of Russian soldiers even harder to comprehend, since most of the danger lies in the soil. Ukrainian officials say when Russian troops rolled into Chernobyl from nearby Belarus, they drove their tanks through the highly contaminated red forest, kicking up dust along the way. Then they chose a path of land just outside the forest to build a camp. A maze of trenches has been carved deep into the soil alongside temporary shelters. And you can actually see photos, drone footage showing where they were digging up pits and trenches. So the International Atomic Energy Assistance, or the IAEA, has visited the site and measured the radiation in the trenches. While it was 4 times higher than on the surrounding roads, the IAEA said it was still within the safe range, right? Even so, they told reporters last month that digging up the soil was still risky, especially without protective equipment. Trenches dug in the Red Forest, which is part of Chernobyl's exclusion zone, were found after Russia pulled out. Quote, quite clearly, it's not a place to have a picnic or excavate. Julia says building trenches in Chernobyl, these soldiers were risking their lives. These occupying soldiers could have received a high dosage of radiation, which will lead to health problems for the rest of their lives. Their lifespan will depend on how long they have spent in these trenches. One of the most famous sites in the exclusion zone was also on the least disturbed during Russia's occupation of the Chernobyl area. The abandoned city of Pripyat, which was originally built to house the nuclear power plant's employees and their families, offered very little comfort to the invading soldiers. The vine-covered apartments and decaying hotels are not livable. The Russian troops only entered them to disable the mobile phone towers perched on top. The old fairground, which is dodgem cars and rusty Ferris wheel, appears to have been left untouched. The town of Chernobyl itself was not so lucky. Residents say Russian troops seemed determined to damage and steal as much as possible. Quote, they looted everything. An engineer who was on duty at the time. Their behavior was illogical. some nuclear engineer, last name is Skirta, of Russian troops during their 1-month occupation of Chernobyl. They smashed all the doors and windows trying to get into the apartments. All of the offices and warehouses were looted. They ran over cars with their tanks, smashed computers and white goods, stole the wheels from cars, and even cut out chrome badges from the steering wheels. What they wouldn't take, they would break. It's like they were doing it for fun. Alexander, like many other Chernobyl residents, live in the town for 15 days a month while maintaining facilities in the wider exclusion zone. He then leaves to give his body a break from radiation. He said the soldiers' erratic, illogical behavior made him fear for the safety of the old nuclear reactor. We are very worried about what could happen. Electricity and the mobile phone connections were shut down. We didn't know what was going on. So, okay. Besides them doing that, which doesn't make any sense at all. It just doesn't make any sense. But then it does. So the reason why I wanted to bring up Russia, the asset, everything going on. He went there because he thought it would just be an easier way to take over more of the country. He just wants to take over the whole thing. So he thought it would make sense to go there, right? And obviously it didn't work. They stayed there a month and they left. And according to these guys, they took a lot of stuff home and they're going to get sick. So what they're saying is, here, we can't understand the behavior of some of the Russian soldiers. They've taken this back to Belarus and from there to their homes. Russian troops blew up the bridges as they withdrew across the border in early April to stop any potential pursuit by the Ukrainian army. But whatever radiation they were exposed to at Chernobyl could still catch up to them. So, okay. Knowing that Ukraine has Chernobyl, knowing that Russia's their very first thought, because they were like, oh, this thing is going to be done over the weekend. We're going to come in, we're going to smash everything. We're going to take Ukraine and that'll be the end of it. 3 years later, this is where we're at. But he went in there. But it wasn't just to take Ukraine. He wanted to go in 8 different directions. That was his entire plan. But he knew the only place he could start from was Chernobyl. This is why I say when Trump says World War III, Russia did not take over Ukraine because if he missiles the crap out of them, he's going to blow up Chernobyl. The whole world knows that. When Trump was like, you're going to start World War III, I think that's what he meant. That he's going to get this to the point that Putin's going to get so stupid and so upset that he's going to take a chance. So right now, Russia is working with Iran and China and North Korea. And they're giving him long-range missiles. If one of those was to hit Chernobyl, all hell would break loose. Keep that in mind. While I also tell you that a few days ago, Chernobyl's dome was hit by a drone from Russia. Let me get that up here. All right. So this is what I mean. Literally knowing how these people get down is horrifying. Horrifying. All you have to do is look up Chernobyl nuclear plant hit by Russian drone attack. And it's the actual video. I'm going to see if I can put the video into this audio. I'm going to try my best. I really am going to try my best. But I'm just going to read this very small part. And this was February 14th. President Zelensky has said that a drone strike at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant overnight showed that Putin, quote, is certainly not preparing for negotiations. Keep that in mind again, what happened in the Oval Office. The only state in the world that can attack such facilities, occupy the territory of nuclear power plants, and conduct hostilities without any regard for the consequences is today's Russia. And this is a terrorist threat to the entire world, he wrote. The drone strike damaged the structure and started a fire, which has been put out. Russia has not commented. The International Atomic Energy Agency said the strike occurred at 1:50 a.m. local. It said that there was no indication of a breach in the inner containment shell. But in 2016, the shell is built in 2016. The shell is a protective cover built around the fourth reactor of the plant, which exploded in 1986. It is designated to limit the release of radioactivity left in the reactor to the atmosphere. Sorry. Okay. Did you get what I said? Did you get what I said? I'm going to end this. I hope you took that in. I am going to do the ending where I'm going to kind of just take little bits and pieces of what I've done over the last 1, 2, 3, 4, I think 5 pieces to put this all together. So I'm just going to round it all up. This is Lovespiracy. I am your host, Trinity, and I really do hope that you enjoyed this series and you come back for the conclusion. All right, see you in a minute.
If you enjoy our content, please show your support by liking, sharing, and following. Our strength is in independent media. Our voices matter. Thank you for making this possible.